You know she's pregnant, right? Has been for a while now. Way before they even got engaged. Those words changed everything. Not for me, but for the man who had thrown away 7 years of marriage like it was nothing more than an inconvenience. My phone had been buzzing nonstop for the past hour, his name flashing across my screen with an urgency he never once showed during our marriage. I stared at it, watching the calls roll in one after another, and felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. My name is Julia, and I am 31 years old. 3 months ago, I finalized my divorce from Brandon, the man I had loved since I was 22 years old. We had met at a mutual friend's birthday party in Louisville, Kentucky, where we both grew up. He was charming, confident, and had a way of making me feel like I was the only woman in any room. I believed in him completely. I believed in us. And for a long time, I thought he believed in us too. I moved to Charlotte, North Carolina, exactly 6 weeks after signing those final papers. The apartment I found was small but filled with natural light, tucked into a quiet neighborhood where nobody knew my name or my story. I needed that anonymity desperately. Back in Louisville, everywhere I turned, there were reminders of the life I had built with Brandon. The life that had crumbled so spectacularly when I discovered he had been having an affair with a woman named Vanessa for nearly 2 years of our marriage. The discovery itself was almost embarrassingly cliché. A late-night text message that popped up on his phone while he was in the shower. I hadn't been snooping. I was simply sitting on the edge of our bed, waiting for him to finish so we could watch a movie together, like we used to do every Friday night. But there it was, glowing in the darkness of our bedroom. I can't wait to see you tomorrow. I miss you already. When I confronted him, he didn't even try to deny it. That was perhaps the most devastating part. He looked at me with something resembling relief, as if my discovery had finally freed him from the burden of pretending to love me. He told me he hadn't been happy for years. He told me Vanessa understood him in ways I never could. He told me that I had become predictable, boring, someone he had outgrown. Those words cut deeper than any betrayal. The man I had built my entire adult life around had reduced me to nothing more than a phase he had moved past. I filed for divorce the very next week. The proceedings were swift and surprisingly uncontested. Brandon wanted out so badly that he agreed to almost everything just to expedite the process. He kept the house we had bought together 3 years prior, the one with the wraparound porch and the garden I had planted with my own hands. I took my car, my savings, and whatever dignity I could salvage from the wreckage of our marriage. Moving to Charlotte was my way of starting over completely. I had secured a job transfer within my company, Larkspur & Finch, a mid-sized interior design firm where I had worked as a project coordinator for the past 5 years. The Charlotte office was smaller but offered me a fresh start, a chance to rebuild my identity outside of being Brandon's wife. Those first few weeks were brutal. I spent most evenings alone in my new apartment, surrounded by boxes I couldn't bring myself to unpack, wondering if I had made the right decision. There were nights when the silence felt suffocating, when I questioned everything I thought I knew about myself and my worth. But slowly, something began to shift. I started to remember who I had been before Brandon, the ambitious woman with dreams that extended far beyond being someone's partner. I learned about his engagement to Vanessa through social media, of course. One of our mutual friends had posted a congratulatory comment on his announcement, and the algorithm made sure I saw it immediately. They were getting married just 3 months after our divorce was finalized. The speed of it should have hurt more than it did. But by then I had already begun to understand that their relationship had been building for years, while I remained oblivious, playing the role of the devoted wife in a marriage that existed only in my imagination. The rehearsal dinner was happening tonight. I knew this because another mutual friend, Chloe, had mentioned it in passing during a phone call earlier in the week. She hadn't meant to hurt me by bringing it up. Chloe had always been caught in the middle, friends with both of us since college, trying desperately to maintain neutrality in an impossible situation. She told me the wedding was planned for tomorrow afternoon at some upscale venue downtown. She told me Vanessa had spared no expense. She told me Brandon seemed happy, though her voice carried a hesitation that suggested she wasn't entirely convinced of that herself. I had made peace with it, or at least I thought I had. Sitting in my new living room with a glass of wine and a book I was pretending to read, I felt disconnected from that chapter of my life in a way that surprised me. Brandon was marrying another woman, and I was okay. More than okay. I was starting to feel like myself again for the first time in years. Then my phone started ringing. The first call came at exactly 8:47 p.m. I remember the time because I had just glanced at the clock on my wall, calculating whether I had enough energy to unpack another box before bed. When I saw Brandon's name on my screen, I assumed it was a mistake. A pocket dial, perhaps, or some cruel cosmic coincidence. We hadn't spoken since the day our divorce was finalized, when he had called to confirm that the paperwork had been processed, and we could officially go our separate ways. I let it ring through to voicemail. The second call came 30 seconds later, then a third, then a fourth. By the time my phone had rung 8 times in less than 10 minutes, I knew something was wrong. Brandon was many things, but persistent wasn't typically one of them. Throughout our marriage, I had been the one to chase, to reach out, to try to maintain connection when he withdrew into himself. He had never once pursued me with this kind of desperation. I turned my phone face down on the coffee table and tried to focus on my book. Whatever crisis he was experiencing was no longer my problem. I had spent 7 years making his problems my problems, his stress my stress, his happiness the metric by which I measured my own worth. Those days were over now, but the calls kept coming. As I sat there listening to my phone vibrate against the wooden surface, I found myself reflecting on the slow death of our marriage. The signs had been there for years, breadcrumbs of disinterest that I had willfully ignored, because acknowledging them would have meant admitting failure. There were the business trips that grew longer and more frequent, the late nights at work that never quite added up, the way he would flinch almost imperceptibly when I touched him, as if my affection had become an inconvenience rather than a comfort. I had made excuses for all of it. Work stress, I told myself. The pressure of his job at the marketing firm where he had climbed through the ranks to become a senior account manager. We were going through a rough patch, like all couples do. Things would get better once the busy season ended, once he closed that big account, once we took that vacation we kept postponing year after year. The vacation never happened. Neither did the improvement in our relationship. Instead, I watched the man I loved slowly transform into a stranger who occupied the other side of our bed, someone I no longer recognized, and who clearly no longer wanted to be recognized by me. The emotional manipulation was subtle, but constant. He had a way of making me feel like every problem in our marriage was somehow my fault. I was too needy, too emotional, too demanding of his attention. When I expressed concerns about our intimacy, he accused me of being obsessed with physical validation. When I suggested couples counseling, he laughed and said I was being dramatic. When I cried, he would leave the room, unable or unwilling to witness the pain he was causing. I learned to shrink myself to accommodate his indifference. I stopped asking for date nights because he would always find an excuse to cancel. I stopped initiating physical affection because the rejection had become too painful. I stopped sharing my achievements at work because he would inevitably find a way to diminish them, to remind me that his career was the important one, the one that demanded priority. By the time I discovered his affair, I had become a shadow of the woman I once was. Vanessa wasn't just the other woman. She was the catalyst that finally forced me to see my marriage for what it truly was. A one-sided devotion to someone who had stopped loving me long before he started loving her. The voicemails began to pile up. I could see the notification count climbing on my phone, each new message another testament to whatever chaos was unfolding at that rehearsal dinner. Part of me was curious. I won't deny that. After years of being ignored and dismissed, there was something darkly satisfying about knowing that Brandon was now the one desperate for my attention. but I resisted the urge to listen. Whatever he had to say could wait. Or better yet, it could remain forever unheard. A message sent into the void to a woman who no longer existed. I thought about the last conversation we had before I left Louisville. It was the day after I had finished moving my belongings out of our house, the house that would now become his and Vanessa's love nest. He had called to ask if I had taken the ceramic vase his mother had given us as a wedding present. I hadn't. I had specifically left everything that connected us behind, wanting no physical reminders of the life we had shared. He had thanked me in a voice devoid of emotion, then wished me well in a way that felt rehearsed, practiced, designed to establish closure without any actual acknowledgement of what he had done. I had hung up feeling hollow, wondering if I had ever truly known the man I married, or if I had simply been in love with a projection of who I wanted him to be. Now, 3 months later, he was calling me repeatedly from what should have been one of the happiest nights of his life. The irony was not lost on me. I had spent years trying to get this man to prioritize me, to show up for me, to demonstrate that our relationship mattered to him. And now, on the eve of his wedding to another woman, he couldn't stop calling. My phone buzzed again. Another voicemail notification appeared on the screen. I finished my wine and went to bed. The next morning, I woke up to 23 missed calls and 14 voicemails. My phone had been buzzing so consistently throughout the night that I had eventually turned it to silent mode, burying it under a pillow on the far side of my bed where it couldn't disturb my sleep. Whatever Brandon was going through, it would have to wait until I had coffee. As I stood in my small kitchen brewing a pot of dark roast, I finally allowed myself to acknowledge the strange flutter of anxiety in my chest. This level of persistence was unprecedented. Even during the worst moments of our marriage, Brandon had never pursued contact with this kind of single-minded determination. Something significant had happened at that rehearsal dinner. Something that had shaken him badly enough to spend an entire night trying to reach his ex-wife. I poured my coffee and sat down at my kitchen table, staring at my phone like it was a live explosive. The rational part of my brain told me to ignore it entirely. Whatever crisis Brandon was experiencing was his problem now, not mine. I had spent years absorbing his chaos, making his emergencies my emergencies, dropping everything whenever he needed support that he never reciprocated. I had earned the right to disconnect, but curiosity is a powerful force. After 7 years with someone, you develop an intimate understanding of their patterns, their behaviors, the specific cadence of their panic, and the sheer volume of these calls suggested something far more serious than cold feet or wedding day jitters. I picked up my phone and navigated to my voicemail. The first message was barely coherent. Brandon's voice sounded strained, almost breathless, words tumbling over each other in a rush of barely contained hysteria. "Julia, please call me back. I know you probably don't want to talk to me, but I really need to talk to you. Something happened tonight and I don't know what to do. Please just call me." The second message was more composed but no less desperate. "It's me again. I'm sorry for calling so much, but this is important. Something came out tonight at the dinner and I'm freaking out. I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I really need to talk to someone who knows me. Please, Julia." I listened to 3 more messages, each one escalating in urgency, each one painting a picture of a man whose world had suddenly shifted beneath his feet. He kept referencing something that had been revealed, something someone had said, but he never explained what it was. The mystery was clearly eating him alive, and some twisted part of him believed that I, his ex-wife, was the appropriate person to help him process whatever bomb had detonated in the middle of his celebration. The audacity of it was almost impressive. This was the man who had dismissed my emotional needs for years, who had told me I was being dramatic when I expressed concerns about our relationship, who had carried on a 2-year affair while making me feel crazy for suspecting something was wrong. And now he expected me to be his emotional support system on the night before his wedding to the woman he had cheated with. I put my phone down and took a long sip of coffee, letting the bitter warmth ground me in the present moment. My apartment was quiet, the morning light filtering through my curtains in soft golden streams. Outside my window, I could hear the distant sounds of Charlotte waking up, cars passing on the street below, birds singing in the trees that lined my neighborhood. This was my life now, this peaceful, independent existence I had carved out for myself in the aftermath of his betrayal. Around noon, my phone rang again. This time, it wasn't Brandon. It was Chloe. I answered immediately, grateful for a connection that didn't carry the weight of my failed marriage. "Hey, what's going on?" "Julia, you're not going to believe what happened last night." Chloe's voice was a mixture of disbelief and barely contained excitement. "I mean, I shouldn't even be telling you this, but you deserve to know." My stomach tightened. "What happened?" "Okay, so we were all at the rehearsal dinner, right? Everything was going fine, speeches were being made, champagne was flowing, and then Brandon's cousin Aaron, you remember him, the one who always drinks too much at family events, he stood up to give a toast. And Julia, I swear, the whole room went silent." I gripped my phone tighter. "What did he say?" "He made this comment about how Brandon and Vanessa were going to be great parents, and everyone kind of laughed because, they just assumed he was talking about the future. But then he said something like, I mean, you guys are already halfway there, right? When's the baby due again?" The words hit me with unexpected force. "She's pregnant?" "She's been pregnant, Julia. That's the thing. Apparently she's been pregnant for months, way before they even got engaged. Some people at the dinner were doing the math out loud, and it became really clear that she was pregnant while you and Brandon were still married. Like, significantly pregnant." I sat in stunned silence, processing this information. The timeline suddenly made horrible, clarifying sense. The rushed engagement, the quick wedding, Brandon's desperate calls last night. He had just discovered, along with everyone else at that dinner, that his new fiancée had been hiding the true timeline of her pregnancy. "Julia, are you still there?" "I'm here," I managed. "I just need a minute." "I'm sorry. I probably shouldn't have told you like this, but I thought you deserved to know what's going on." Brandon looked like he was going to be sick when he realized what Aaron had accidentally revealed. Vanessa was crying and trying to do damage control, but the cat was out of the bag. Everyone knows now. I thanked Chloe for calling and ended the conversation, my mind racing with implications I hadn't anticipated. Brandon's calls suddenly made sense. He wasn't reaching out because he missed me or regretted his choices. He was reaching out because his entire narrative had just collapsed, and I was the only person who could confirm whether his worst suspicions were true. The baby might not be his. My phone buzzed again. Another call from Brandon. This time, the panic in my chest had been replaced by something else entirely, something that felt dangerously close to satisfaction. The text message arrived at exactly 2:17 p.m., just as I was sitting down to eat a late lunch that I had no real appetite for. The words on my screen were simple, but they carried a weight that 7 years of marriage had taught me to recognize. "I need to talk to you urgently. Please, Julia, I know I don't deserve it, but please just give me 5 minutes." I read the message 3 times, each reading revealing new layers of irony. Urgent. The word bounced around my skull like a ping-pong ball. For years, my emotional needs had been anything but urgent to Brandon. Every time I had asked for his attention, his presence, his basic acknowledgement that I existed as more than a convenient domestic partner, he had found ways to minimize and deflect. My concerns were never urgent. My feelings were never a priority. But now, facing the consequences of his own choices, suddenly, everything was urgent. I set my phone down and pushed away my salad, no longer interested in eating. The satisfaction I had felt earlier was beginning to curdle into something more complicated. I didn't want to feel anything for this man anymore. I had worked so hard over the past 3 months to untangle my emotions from his, to establish a sense of self that existed independently of our failed marriage. And yet here he was, pulling me back into his orbit with his desperate texts and panicked voicemails. The thing about emotional manipulation is that it doesn't simply vanish when the relationship ends. I had spent so many years calibrating my responses to Brandon's needs that the impulse to comfort him still flickered somewhere deep in my nervous system, a learned behavior that my rational mind was fighting to override. He was hurting, and some residual part of me still wanted to fix it. But I didn't owe him that anymore. I picked up my phone and typed a response that was deliberately brief. "What do you want, Brandon?" His reply came within seconds, as if he had been staring at his screen waiting for any sign of engagement. "Can I call you, please? I know the wedding is in a few hours, but I'm losing my mind and I need to talk to someone who will be honest with me." The wedding was still happening. Despite whatever bomb had exploded at the rehearsal dinner, despite the revelation that Vanessa had been hiding the true timeline of her pregnancy, Brandon was apparently still planning to marry her in a few hours. The absurdity of it almost made me laugh out loud. He was about to legally bind himself to a woman whose deception had just been exposed to everyone they knew, and his response was to call his ex-wife for emotional support. I thought about all the times during our marriage when I had begged for this kind of access to his inner world. The nights when I had asked him to share what he was feeling, only to be met with walls and deflection. The conversations where I had poured out my heart about my fears and insecurities, only to receive dismissive platitudes in return. He had never let me in. Not really. And now, when he was finally cracking open, he expected me to be waiting on the other side. "I'm not your therapist, Brandon," I typed back. "And I'm not your wife anymore. Whatever you're going through, you need to figure it out yourself." My phone rang immediately. I stared at his name flashing across my screen, feeling the familiar push and pull of wanting to answer and wanting to protect myself from further involvement. After the third ring, I made a decision that surprised even me. I answered, "Julia, thank God." His voice was ragged, stripped of the confident charm that had once drawn me to him. "I didn't think you would pick up." "I almost didn't. You have 5 minutes." Okay. I could hear him taking a deep breath, trying to compose himself. "I assume you heard about what happened last night. Chloe was there, and I know how quickly information travels. I heard that your cousin accidentally revealed Vanessa's pregnancy timeline at the rehearsal dinner. I heard that everyone in the room started doing math and realized she was pregnant while we were still married. It's worse than that." His voice cracked slightly on the last word. "Julia, she told me the baby was conceived in March of this year. That would mean she got pregnant a month after our divorce was finalized. But last night, Erin mentioned something about her being further along than that. Way further along. And when I confronted her after the dinner, she admitted the truth." I felt my grip tighten on the phone. "What's the truth?" "She's been pregnant since November of last year, Julia, when we were still married. When she swore to me that our relationship hadn't gotten physical yet, that they were just talking, just emotionally connecting. She lied to me about everything." November. I did the mental calculation quickly. November meant she was now roughly 8 months pregnant, far more advanced than a post-divorce conception would allow. November meant that while I was still sleeping next to Brandon every night, still trying to salvage our marriage, still believing that his emotional distance was something we could work through together, Vanessa was already carrying what might be his child, or might not be. The implications crashed over me like a wave. "Brandon, are you calling me because you think the baby might not be yours?" The silence on the other end of the line was answer enough. "I can't believe this is happening," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I left you for her. I destroyed our marriage for her. I convinced myself that what we had was special, that she was my soulmate, that I was finally with someone who understood me. And now I'm finding out that the whole foundation of our relationship was built on lies. I should have felt vindicated." This was the moment I had imagined countless times during those dark nights after discovering his affair. the fantasy of karma delivering exactly what he deserved. But instead of satisfaction, I felt a strange hollowness. This man who had broken my heart was now having his heart broken in return, and I couldn't find the joy in it that I had expected. "I need to know something, Julia," he continued before I could respond. "When you found out about the affair, did you ever suspect it had been going on longer than I admitted? Did you ever think there was more that I wasn't telling you?" The question hung in the air between us, a bridge between his past deception and his present discovery. I thought about all the nights I had lain awake, replaying our conversations, examining every suspicious text and unexplained absence. I thought about the times my intuition had screamed that something was wrong, only to be silenced by his reassurances and my own desperate need to believe in our marriage. I suspected a lot of things, Brandon, but you were very good at making me doubt my own perceptions. Over the next hour, I learned more about the unraveling of Brandon's relationship with Vanessa than I had ever wanted to know. He talked, and I listened, not because I owed him anything, but because some dark corner of my heart needed to hear how thoroughly his fantasy had collapsed. According to Brandon, the confrontation after the rehearsal dinner had been explosive. When he had pressed Vanessa for the truth about her pregnancy timeline, she had initially tried to maintain her lie. She insisted that Aaron was mistaken, that family members often got dates confused, that she was exactly as pregnant as she had claimed. But Brandon had done his own calculation, had noticed how her body had changed in ways that didn't match her stated timeline, and had refused to accept her denials. Eventually, she broke. She admitted that she had been pregnant since November, that she had known about the pregnancy for months before she told him, that she had deliberately timed her revelation to coincide with my discovery of the affair, so that she could use the chaos to lock him down before he had a chance to reconsider. She had seen his marriage ending and had moved to secure her position, using the pregnancy as insurance that he couldn't walk away from her the way he had walked away from me. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part, Brandon told me in a voice that seemed to be coming from very far away, was that the timing of the conception was uncertain. He and Vanessa had been together since October of the previous year, but during those early months, she had also been maintaining a relationship with someone else, a co-worker from her job at the pharmaceutical company where she worked in human resources. A man named Thomas, who had apparently been devastated when she had ended things to pursue her future with Brandon. Thomas. The name meant nothing to me, but to Brandon, it clearly meant everything. The possibility that the child Vanessa was carrying might belong to another man had shattered whatever remained of his trust in her. He had confronted her about Thomas, and she had admitted that she couldn't be completely certain about the paternity. She had promised to get a DNA test after the baby was born, had sworn that she was almost positive the child was Brandon's, had begged him to go through with the wedding regardless, and he was considering it. "I don't know what to do, Julia," he said, his voice cracking with exhaustion and confusion. "The wedding is in 3 hours. All of our families are here. We've spent thousands of dollars on this event, and part of me thinks I should just go through with it and deal with the paternity question later. But another part of me feels like I'm walking into a trap that I'll never be able to escape from." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything that had been revealed, after learning that the woman he had betrayed me for had been lying to him from the very beginning, he was still considering marrying her. The cognitive dissonance was almost impressive. "Brandon, why are you calling me?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "What exactly do you think I can offer you right now? Permission? Absolution? I'm the last person who should be advising you on whether to marry the woman you cheated on me with." "I don't know why I'm calling you," he admitted. "I just know that you're the only person who will be honest with me. Everyone else here has an agenda. Her family wants the wedding to happen so they don't have to deal with the scandal of a canceled event. My family is too confused to know what to think. My friends are telling me to run, but they never liked Vanessa anyway, so I can't tell if they're being objective or just biased. And you think I'm not biased? Brandon, You destroyed my life. You made me feel worthless for years. You let me believe that the failure of our marriage was my fault, that I was the one who couldn't measure up, when the whole time you were building a life with someone else behind my back. I'm probably the most biased person on the planet when it comes to you. I know. His voice was small, almost childlike. I know what I did to you was unforgivable, and I know I have no right to ask anything of you. But Julia, you were always the one who saw me clearly. Even when I was lying to myself, you could see through it. You always knew when something was off, even when I convinced you to doubt your own instincts. The admission landed somewhere deep in my chest, stirring emotions I thought I had buried. He was right, in a twisted way. Throughout our marriage, I had possessed an intuition about his behavior that he had systematically worked to undermine. Every time I sensed something was wrong, he had found a way to make me question my perception, to believe that my concerns were unfounded, to gaslight me into accepting explanations that my gut told me were lies. And now he was asking me to use that same intuition on his behalf. What do you want me to tell you, Brandon? That you should marry her because you've already come this far? That you should walk away because she can't be trusted? I don't have the answers you're looking for. This is your decision, not mine. Do you think she loves me? The question came out in a rush, like he had been holding it back the entire conversation. I mean, really loves me. Not just the life I can provide or the stability or whatever. Do you think there's anything real underneath all the lies? I thought about Vanessa, a woman I had never met, but had imagined countless times in the months since discovering her existence. I had pictured her as calculating, opportunistic, someone who had seen an opening in my troubled marriage and had exploited it without remorse. But I had never considered the possibility that she might genuinely love Brandon, that her deceptions might have been born from fear of losing him rather than simple manipulation. It didn't matter. Love built on lies was not love at all. It was a house of cards waiting to collapse. I think, I said slowly, choosing my words with care, that you need to ask yourself whether you can spend the rest of your life with someone who has already proven she's willing to deceive you about something this fundamental. A child, Brandon. She lied to you about a child. If she can lie about that, what else is she capable of lying about? The silence that followed was the longest of our entire conversation. Brandon called me back an hour later. By then, I had moved from my kitchen table to my couch, curled up with a cup of tea I had brewed more for the comfort of holding something warm than any actual desire to drink it. His name appeared on my screen with an inevitability that I had somehow been expecting. He wasn't done with me yet. I'm not going through with it, he said, before I could even say hello. His voice sounded different now, steadier, as if the chaos of the morning had crystallized into some kind of clarity. I just told Vanessa that the wedding is canceled. I absorbed this information with a mixture of relief and apprehension. How did she take it? About as well as you'd expect. She's hysterical. Her mother is screaming at me in the other room. Her father threatened to sue me for the cost of the wedding, which is ridiculous since I paid for most of it anyway. But I don't care anymore. I can't marry someone I don't trust, and I definitely can't raise a child that might not even be mine without knowing the truth first. Part of me wanted to congratulate him on making the right decision. Another part of me recognized that this wasn't really my place anymore. I had been his sounding board for the day, but I had no interest in becoming his emotional support system going forward. Brandon, I'm glad you're doing what feels right for you, I said carefully. But I need you to understand something. This phone call, this whole conversation today, it doesn't change anything between us. We're still divorced. You still betrayed me. And once this crisis passes, I need you to respect my boundaries and leave me alone. I know, he said quickly. I know that. I'm not calling you because I think we can get back together or anything like that. I understand that ship has sailed. I'm calling you because I wanted to apologize. The word hung in the air between us. In 7 years of marriage and 3 months of divorce, Brandon had never once apologized for the affair. He had explained it, rationalized it, deflected responsibility for it, but he had never simply said he was sorry. "I'm listening," I said, my voice neutral despite the turmoil in my chest. "I was wrong, Julia. Everything I did to you was wrong. The affair, the lies, the way I made you feel like you were crazy for suspecting something. I convinced myself that our marriage was dead and that I deserved to find happiness elsewhere. But the truth is, I killed it. I killed it by checking out years ago, by refusing to do the work that relationships require, by taking you for granted while I looked for something more exciting." I felt tears pricking at the corners of my eyes and angrily blinked them back. I didn't want to cry for him. I had shed enough tears over this man to fill an ocean, and he didn't deserve any more of my grief. "The thing about Vanessa," he continued, his voice growing more contemplative, "is that I thought being with her felt different because she was special, because we had some kind of unique connection that you and I lacked. But now I realize it only felt different because it was new. The excitement wasn't about her. It was about the novelty, the secrecy, the thrill of doing something forbidden. And once that wore off, once we were living together and dealing with real life instead of sneaking around, I started to see that she wasn't any more special than anyone else." "That's a painful realization," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "But it's one you should have had before you threw away our marriage." "I know, God, I know. And the worst part is that I can see now that what I had with you was real. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. You loved me in a way that Vanessa never could, because she was always performing, always calculating how to get what she wanted. I was too stupid and too arrogant to see it." I let his words wash over me without responding immediately. There was a time when hearing this would have meant everything to me. During those dark weeks after discovering the affair, I would have given anything to hear Brandon acknowledge that our marriage had value, that I had been a good wife, that his betrayal wasn't a reflection of my inadequacy. But too much time had passed. The wound had scarred over, and his words couldn't reach the tender places they once would have found. "Brandon, I appreciate you saying all of this. I really do. But I need you to understand that it doesn't undo what happened. It doesn't erase the years of emotional neglect or the devastation of finding out the person I trusted most had been lying to me. An apology is a good start, but it's not absolution." "I'm not asking for absolution," he said quietly. "I'm just asking you to believe that I'm finally seeing clearly, maybe for the first time in my life." I heard a commotion in the background of the call, raised voices and what sounded like someone crying. The canceled wedding was clearly descending into chaos, and Brandon was standing in the middle of it, choosing to call me instead of dealing with the fallout. "It sounds like you have things to handle there," I said. "I'm going to let you go." "Wait, Julia. One more thing." He paused, and I could hear him swallowing hard. "I know I have no right to ask, but if things settle down, would you consider having coffee with me sometime? Not to get back together, just to talk. I feel like I owe you more than a phone conversation can provide." I thought about the life I was building in Charlotte, the quiet mornings in my sunlit apartment, the job I was excelling at, the friendships I was slowly cultivating with people who knew nothing about my marriage or my divorce. I thought about how hard I had worked to create distance from this man and everything he represented. "No," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "I don't think that would be good for either of us. I wish you well, Brandon. I genuinely hope you figure out what happened with Vanessa and the baby, and I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for. But I can't be part of your journey anymore." Before he could respond, I ended the call. My phone rang again almost immediately. This time, I didn't answer. I watched his name flash across my screen until it finally went dark, and then I blocked his number. Whatever consequences were coming for Brandon, they were his alone to face. The aftermath of that phone call lingered in my apartment, like smoke from a candle that had been abruptly blown out. I sat on my couch for what felt like hours, processing everything that had happened, everything that had been said, everything that was still unfolding hundreds of miles away in Louisville, where my former husband's wedding had just imploded. Blocking Brandon's number had been surprisingly easy. A few taps on my screen and 7 years of history were reduced to silence. No more calls would come through. No more desperate voicemails would accumulate. Whatever chaos was erupting in his life, I had finally, definitively, removed myself from its orbit. The satisfaction I had expected to feel was slower to arrive than I anticipated. For so long, I had imagined the moment when Brandon would realize the magnitude of his mistakes. In my fantasies, he would come crawling back, devastated by regret, only to find that I had moved on and no longer cared. The reality was messier than that. He wasn't crawling back to me. He was simply drowning in the consequences of his choices, and I happened to be the closest lifeboat he could think of. But I had declined to rescue him. And that, I realized, was a form of revenge more satisfying than any dramatic confrontation could have been. I stood up from the couch and walked to my window, looking out at the Charlotte skyline glowing in the afternoon light. 3 months ago, I had arrived in this city broken and uncertain, carrying the weight of my failed marriage like a stone around my neck. I had questioned everything about myself: my worth, my judgment, my ability to be loved. Brandon's betrayal had shattered my confidence so thoroughly that I barely recognized the woman I saw in the mirror each morning. But something had shifted in the weeks since my move. Slowly, painfully, I had begun to reconstruct myself from the rubble he had left behind. I had thrown myself into my work at Larkspur and Finch, earning recognition for my contributions to a major commercial project that had impressed even the senior partners. I had started running again, a hobby I had abandoned during my marriage, when Brandon complained that my exercise routine took time away from him. I had made tentative friendships with a few women in my apartment building, meeting for coffee and wine and the kind of low-stakes conversation that required nothing from me but my presence. None of these changes were dramatic. There had been no sudden transformation, no movie montage moment where I emerged from my cocoon as a completely different person. The healing had been gradual, incremental, often invisible to anyone but myself. But it was real. And standing at my window on the day my ex-husband's wedding collapsed, I could finally see how far I had come. My phone buzzed with a text message from Chloe. "The wedding is officially canceled. Vanessa is threatening to tell everyone that Brandon is the one who lied about the timeline. It's complete chaos. Are you okay?" I typed back a response that surprised me with its brevity and honesty. "I'm actually doing great. Thanks for checking in." Because I was. For the first time since discovering Brandon's affair, I felt genuinely okay. Not because his life was falling apart, though I would be lying if I said that didn't provide some sense of cosmic justice. I felt okay because I had finally stopped measuring my well-being against his. His happiness or misery was no longer my concern. My own life, my own peace, my own future were the only metrics that mattered now. I thought about what Brandon had said during our last conversation, his belated realization that what we had was real, his acknowledgement that he had thrown away something valuable in pursuit of excitement and novelty. A year ago, those words would have devastated me. They would have sent me spiraling into grief and regret, wondering what might have been if he had only seen clearly sooner. But now, standing in my own apartment in a city I had chosen for myself, I understood that his realizations were not my responsibility. He could see the truth now, because he was finally experiencing consequences. His clarity wasn't born from growth or self-reflection. It was born from pain, and pain was something I was no longer willing to share with him. The sun was beginning to set outside my window, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that I had never bothered to notice during my marriage. I had been too busy monitoring Brandon's moods, too consumed with trying to be the wife he wanted, to pay attention to small beauties like this. But now I had the bandwidth to notice. Now I had the peace to appreciate. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Megan, a coworker I had grown close to since my transfer. "Drinks tonight? I heard you had a crazy day." I smiled and typed back, "You have no idea. But yes, drinks sound perfect." The photos from the canceled wedding started appearing on social media that evening. I saw them while sitting at a bar with Megan, scrolling through my phone between sips of a cocktail that tasted like freedom. Someone had captured images of the venue, empty chairs arranged in rows that would never be filled, an altar decorated with flowers that no bride would walk toward. The captions ranged from sympathetic to gleeful, depending on the poster's relationship to the parties involved. One photo in particular caught my attention. It showed Brandon standing outside the venue, his suit jacket off, his tie loosened, his face a mask of exhaustion and defeat. Beside him stood Vanessa, her expression a combination of fury and desperation that the camera had captured with brutal clarity. Even from a photograph, I could see the tension between them, the absolute collapse of whatever fantasy they had been maintaining. Megan leaned over to look at my screen. "Is that him? Your ex?" I nodded, feeling oddly detached from the image. "That's him. And that's the woman he left me for. She looks like she's about to murder someone." "She probably is." I put my phone down and picked up my drink. The wedding was supposed to happen today. Obviously it didn't. Megan's eyes widened with curiosity. "What happened? I mean, if you want to talk about it, you don't have to." I found myself wanting to share, not from a place of pain, but from a place of something approaching amusement. The whole situation had taken on a surreal quality, like watching a soap opera unfold in real time. I told Megan about the rehearsal dinner revelation, about the pregnancy timeline that didn't add up, about the possibility that the baby might not even be Brandon's. I told her about the desperate phone calls, the blocked number, the moment I finally disconnected from the man who had consumed so much of my emotional energy for so many years. "That's insane," Megan said when I finished. "I mean, genuinely insane. You couldn't write this stuff." "I know. And the crazy thing is, 6 months ago, this would have destroyed me. Finding out that his perfect new relationship was actually built on lies. That the woman he chose over me was manipulating him the whole time. I would have felt vindicated, but also devastated. Like maybe if I had just been different, better, more, he wouldn't have been vulnerable to someone like her. But now, I took a long sip of my drink, considering the question. Now I just feel sorry for both of them. They deserve each other, in the worst possible way. He's a man who doesn't know how to be honest in relationships, and she's a woman who saw that weakness and exploited it. Whatever happens between them next is their problem, not mine. The conversation shifted to lighter topics after that. Megan told me about a guy she was dating, a dentist named Christopher, who had an unfortunate habit of evaluating her teeth every time they kissed. I laughed harder than I had in months, feeling the accumulated tension of the day releasing from my body in waves. By the time I got home that night, I had made a decision. I was done checking for updates on Brandon's situation. The photos, the social media posts, the secondhand gossip from mutual friends, none of it served any purpose except to keep me tethered to a past I was actively trying to leave behind. Whatever happened with the canceled wedding, the potential paternity question, the inevitable fallout between Brandon and Vanessa, I didn't need to know. I opened my social media app and began the process of unfollowing anyone who might provide a window into his life. Mutual friends from Louisville who I hadn't spoken to in months. Distant relatives from his family who had accepted my friend request during our marriage. Even Chloe, though I sent her a private message first explaining that I wasn't ending our friendship, just creating necessary boundaries. By midnight, my digital connection to Brandon's world had been severed as completely as my phone line. He existed now only in my memories, a chapter of my life that was finally, truly, closed. I stood in the center of my small apartment and looked around at the space I had created for myself. The furniture I had chosen without consulting anyone else's taste. The art on the walls that reflected my personality. not some compromise between two different visions. The plants I was learning to keep alive, small green reminders that I was capable of nurturing growth even after so much destruction. This was my life now, not the aftermath of a failed marriage, not the recovery period before something else began. This was my life, complete and whole, and entirely my own. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt genuinely excited about my future. 6 months passed. The seasons changed outside my Charlotte apartment, summer fading into fall, and then into a mild winter that barely required a heavy coat. I settled into a rhythm that felt increasingly natural, increasingly mine. My career at Larkspur and Finch flourished in ways I hadn't anticipated. The project I had worked on during my first months in Charlotte led to a promotion and a significant raise. Recognition for contributions that had nothing to do with my personal life or the chaos I had fled. My boss, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia, who ran the office with equal parts precision and warmth, had become something of a mentor, encouraging me to pursue opportunities I never would have considered during my marriage. I started taking evening classes in textile design, a passion I had abandoned years ago when Brandon had dismissed it as impractical. The feel of fabric under my fingers, the meditation of working with color and pattern, filled something in me that I hadn't realized was empty. My instructor suggested I had real talent, a comment that made me cry in my car after class because I had forgotten what it felt like to be genuinely good at something that brought me joy. News about Brandon trickled in occasionally despite my best efforts to create distance. Chloe called every few months to check in, and though she tried to respect my boundaries, sometimes information slipped through. The wedding had never been rescheduled. The paternity test had confirmed that the baby was indeed Brandon's, but the damage to his relationship with Vanessa was apparently irreparable. They had attempted to stay together for the child's sake, but had separated before the baby was even born. Brandon was now a single father to a daughter he hadn't planned for, conceived in deception and born into chaos. He had lost his job at the marketing firm during the upheaval, his performance suffering under the weight of his personal disaster. Last Chloe heard, he was working a lesser position at a smaller company, splitting custody of his daughter with a woman who had never stopped being angry at him for calling off their wedding. I listened to these updates with something approaching peace. The vindictive satisfaction I had expected to feel never quite materialized. Instead, I felt a kind of distant compassion for the mess he had made of his life. Compassion that existed entirely separate from any desire to help or intervene. He had chosen his path. Every step of the way, he had chosen. The woman I was becoming in Charlotte bore little resemblance to the woman who had discovered her husband's affair in a dark bedroom in Louisville. That woman had been consumed by grief and self-doubt, questioning everything she thought she knew about love and trust and her own worth. This woman, the one I saw in my mirror now, had learned that she was capable of rebuilding from ashes. She had learned that betrayal was not an indictment of her value, but a reflection of someone else's character. She had learned that the best revenge was not destruction, but evolution. I thought often about that phone call on the day of his canceled wedding. The desperation in his voice. The way he had reached for me like a drowning man reaching for a life preserver. The moment I had realized that whatever he was feeling was no longer my responsibility to fix. That moment had been a turning point, though I hadn't recognized it at the time. In choosing not to rescue him, I had finally rescued myself. In blocking his number, I had unblocked my own future. In walking away from his crisis, I had walked toward my own peace. Standing in my apartment on a quiet Sunday morning, coffee in hand and sunlight streaming through my windows, I allowed myself to feel proud of the journey I had taken. It wasn't the life I had planned. It wasn't the future I had imagined when I married Brandon at 24, full of hope and certainty about our love. But it was a life I had built with my own hands from the wreckage of his betrayal, and it was more beautiful than anything I could have constructed while still trapped in his shadow. Brandon's choices had destroyed him in ways he probably still didn't fully understand. His reputation in Louisville had suffered, his career had stalled, his relationships with friends and family were strained by the scandal of the canceled wedding, and the revelation of Vanessa's deception. He had traded a stable marriage for an affair that unraveled spectacularly in front of everyone he knew, and the consequences continued to ripple through his life long after the initial crisis had passed. Some wounds never fully heal, and his were entirely self-inflicted. As for me, I had discovered something unexpected in the aftermath of his betrayal. I was stronger than I had ever imagined. The woman who had once shrunk herself to accommodate his indifference had grown into someone who took up space unapologetically, who pursued her passions without seeking permission, who built a life that answered to no one but herself. The revenge I had wanted wasn't about watching him suffer. It was about thriving so completely that his opinion of me became irrelevant. I set down my coffee and smiled at my reflection in the window. My revenge journey had taught me the most important lesson of all. The best way to overcome someone who tried to diminish you is to become someone they could never diminish again.